The rain hammered the street like fists, traffic screaming past as Imani sprinted across the crosswalk. Her breath tore in her chest, her interview folder soaked against her ribs. Then she saw him. A white-haired man stepped off the curb and suddenly collapsed forward, straight into oncoming headlights. She didn't think. She lunged. Her hands gripped his coat, yanking him backward a split second before a speeding car ripped through the intersection, missing them by inches. Hot air blasted her clothes. Her knees slammed concrete. His body fell on top of her. Tires screeched. The world shook. And right when she thought she'd saved a life, a driver leaned out the window, pointed at her soaked black face, and screamed, "You people don't know how to act." If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening, and the world needs to hear them. Imani gritted her teeth as the old man trembled in her arms. The coffee cup he hurled splashed her shoulder, burning hot. She didn't flinch. She shielded the old man instead. "You all right, sir?" she whispered, breathing hard. I nearly died," he murmured, voice shaking. "You saved me." "Let's get you up," she said, ignoring the pain shooting down her arm. Her blazer was ruined. Her knee was bleeding. Her papers, her resume, her essay, her recommendations floated across the pavement, ink bleeding in the rain. She scrambled, gathering what she could. Every second stabbed like a countdown. Interview starts in 6 minutes. She forced a smile at the old man. "You should sit somewhere warm. Please be safe." He stared at her as if trying to say something, but the storm swallowed his voice. Imani ran. Her wet heels slapped asphalt. Her shoulder burned. Her folder dripped. But her dream, a fellowship interview she had worked 2 years for, was still breathing if she could reach it. She burst through the university gates, chest heaving, clothes drenched, hair plastered to her face. Inside the marble lobby, all eyes turned toward the soaked black woman stumbling toward the desk. And standing behind it was Ashley, arms folded, eyes cold, already judging her. Imani stepped toward the reception desk, water dripping from her sleeves onto the polished marble floor. "Ashley, I'm here for the Whitmore Fellowship interview," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's at 9. I had an emergency." Ashley didn't blink. Her eyes flicked over Imani's soaked clothes, the torn blazer, the smeared papers clutched against her chest. "You're late," Ashley said flatly. "I saved a man who collapsed in the street," Imani explained, breath trembling. "A car almost hit him. Please, I just need a chance to explain to the panel." Ashley raised an eyebrow, like she'd heard a bad joke. Everyone has excuses. "You should have planned better." Imani swallowed. "Ma'am, I pulled someone out of traffic. That's not an excuse." Ashley leaned forward. "Your appearance alone disqualifies you. You're dripping all over the floor, your documents are destroyed, and frankly, this isn't the impression the Whitmore Foundation wants." Imani felt her throat tighten. "I didn't choose to arrive like this," she whispered. "I chose to save a life." Ashley stepped from behind the desk. The click of her heels echoed through the lobby. "Stand up straight," she snapped. Imani froze. "We already moved on to the next candidate," Ashley said. "You can go." "Please," Imani whispered, stepping closer. "I've worked 2 years for this. Just 5 minutes. 5 minutes and I'll..." Ashley grabbed her elbow, fingers digging into the fabric. "Don't make a scene," she hissed. "Your type always plays victim. It's embarrassing." Imani's chest caved in. The hurt wasn't from the words. It was from how confidently Ashley said them, like it was the truth. "I'm begging you," Imani said, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for a chance." Ashley's lip curled. "We don't reward pity, and we don't waste time." A security guard approached, concern in his eyes. "Is everything all right?" "She needs to leave," Ashley said quickly. "She's disturbing the schedule." The guard touched Imani's arm gently. "Ma'am, maybe you should step outside for a moment." Imani pulled her arm away, humiliation burning hotter than the coffee had. "I'm not disturbing anything," she said quietly. "I'm just asking to be heard." Ashley crossed her arms. "And I'm saying no." The guard sighed. "Ma'am, please." Imani stared at the closed interview room door down the hall. Behind it were people she had dreamed of speaking to, people who might have understood her work, her passion, her mother's sacrifices. But Ashley stood like a wall between her and everything she'd built herself up for. Imani finally exhaled, slow, defeated. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll go." She walked back into the rain, the cold swallowing her whole. Her dream hadn't just slipped away. It had been pushed. The bus ride home felt longer than the entire morning. Imani sat in the very back, her soaked folder on her lap, her shoulder throbbing where the hot coffee had burned her. Nobody looked at her. Nobody asked if she was okay. She stared out the foggy window as the city lights blurred into streaks, each one reminding her of the interview room she never reached. When she reached her neighborhood, the sky was still gray but quieter. South Briar always felt tired, like the buildings themselves were waiting for a break that never came. Imani pushed open the apartment door, and the warm smell of beans simmering on the stove washed over her. Her mother, Latoya, looked up from the tiny kitchen. "Baby, what happened to you?" she whispered, rushing over. Imani's throat tightened. "I'm fine," she said, even though she clearly wasn't. "You're bleeding," Latoya murmured, touching her burned shoulder with trembling fingers. "Lord, Imani, talk to me." Imani sank onto a chair. Her wet paper spilled across the table. "I saved a man," she said quietly. "He fainted in the street. I pulled him back from a car. That's why I was late." Latoya's eyes softened with pride and worry. "An interview?" Imani laughed weakly, a sound full of exhaustion. "They dragged me out, called me my type, said I was embarrassing." Latoya closed her eyes like she was swallowing years of hurt. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "The right thing cost me everything," Imani replied. Her mother sat beside her, taking her hand. This silence wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken history. All the times the world made them fight twice as hard for half as much. Imani stared at her ruined resume. "What was the point of all this?" she whispered. "I study, I work, I sacrifice, I save someone's life, and still I'm nothing." Latoya squeezed her hand. "You are not nothing. You hear me?" Imani wanted to believe her. She didn't. She went to her small bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed her forehead into her palms. Her dream wasn't just slipping away. It had drowned. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she glanced at the screen and froze. "Miss Imani," a calm voice said. "I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Carter Whitmore, the man you saved this morning. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe." Imani's heart slammed against her ribs. What does he want with me?" she whispered. The voice replied gently. "He'd like to meet you, privately, today." Her life, just when it shattered, had cracked open again. Imani paced the small living room, her heart racing harder than it had all morning. "Meet me? Why would he want to meet me?" she murmured. Latoya wiped her hands on a towel. "Because you saved his life, baby. Maybe the Lord finally sent something good your way." Imani swallowed. Or maybe it's a mistake. Her phone buzzed again. A follow-up text. "A car will pick you up. Any location you choose. Elaine Monroe, personal assistant to Mr. Whitmore." Imani stared at the message. She didn't own fancy clothes. Her best blouse still smelled faintly of rain. Her hair was frizzy at the ends. Her confidence was cracked straight through the middle. But Latoya stepped forward and gently touched her cheek. "Wear my good earrings," she said, "and lift your chin. You saved a man today. That alone makes you worthy." Imani nodded slowly. She changed into her cleanest outfit, smoothed her hair, and reapplied the small bit of makeup she had left. She took a deep breath before stepping outside. A black town car idled quietly at the curb. The driver held the door for her with a respectful nod. The ride across the city felt unreal. Tall buildings replaced worn sidewalks. Clean streets replaced cracked pavement. She wasn't sure if she belonged in this world. Yet here she was, being driven straight into it. The car stopped in front of Molly's diner, a modest little spot she'd chosen because it felt safe, neutral, normal. She wasn't ready for fancy restaurants or glass towers. Inside, she chose a booth near the window. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around a warm mug of tea. The door chimed. Every head in the diner turned. Carter Whitmore walked in quietly. No bodyguards, no entourage, no billionaire arrogance. Just a man looking for the person who saved him. When his eyes found her, he paused, then smiled with something like relief. He approached the table and extended his hand. "Miss Imani," he said gently, "thank you for agreeing to meet me." Imani stood, nervous as her fingers brushed his. "You didn't give me much choice," she said with a half smile. Carter actually laughed, soft, warm. "Fair enough, but I wanted to thank you properly. You saved my life today." He sat across from her, his posture humble, his eyes sincere. "You pulled me out of danger," without hesitation. "People don't do that anymore." Imani looked down at her tea. "I just didn't want to watch someone get hurt." Carter leaned in slightly. "And because of that, you lost something important." "I know." Her breath caught. He wasn't guessing. He knew. "I want to make this right," he said quietly. "All of it." The words landed like a spark in a dark room. Small, but bright enough to matter. Carter folded his hands on the table, his expression shifting from gentle warmth to something more serious, heavier. "I looked into what happened at the university," he said quietly. "They shouldn't have treated you that way." Imani's stomach tightened. You talked to them?" He shook his head. "Not yet. I wanted to hear your side first." Imani exhaled shakily. "I wasn't late because I overslept. I wasn't careless. I was helping you." "I know," Carter said. "And that's exactly why the situation is unacceptable." He opened a folder he had brought with him. Clean, crisp edges, the kind of folder belonging to someone who always had power. Inside it was her application, her essay, her transcript, perfectly printed copies. Her breath caught. "How did you?" "I had my assistant pull everything the moment I realized you weren't just a stranger who happened to be in the right place." He paused, studying her. "You're exceptional, Imani. You're passionate, driven, and you understand communities in a way no textbook can teach." Imani blinked rapidly, unsure she was supposed to believe this or brace for disappointment. "I want to sponsor a new initiative," Carter continued. "One focused on real neighborhood development. Not paperwork, not politics. Actual change. And I want you to lead it." Imani stared at him. Her voice barely escaped. "You want me?" "Yes," he said, "because heart matters. And you have it." Before she could speak, the waitress approached with 2 coffees, smiling awkwardly at the billionaire in her booth. When she left, Carter lowered his voice. "But there's something you need to know." The air shifted. Carter leaned back slightly, glancing toward the window like he was watching for shadows. "I'm not the only one who noticed you." Imani stiffened. "What does that mean?" Carter hesitated. "Whitmore Corporation isn't just me. There are people with very different priorities. People who don't want anyone questioning how our real estate deals work, especially in neighborhoods like yours." Imani frowned, confused. "I'm not trying to cause trouble." "I know you're not," he said. "But to them, someone with influence, someone with a voice, someone a community begins to trust," he paused, "is a threat." Imani felt her pulse in her throat. "Why would they see me that way?" Carter's jaw tightened. He looked genuinely frustrated. "Because they don't want change. They want control." She swallowed. "Are you saying someone might try to stop me?" Carter's eyes darkened. "They already are. Imani, the moment you walked out of that interview, someone in my company filed a report on you." Imani's breath hitched. "A report? On what?" He met her gaze, voice low. "On why a black woman like you was suddenly on my radar." Her world shifted. Powerful enemies had noticed her before she even understood her own power. Imani's hands tightened around her mug as Carter's words echoed in her chest. "A report about me? Why?" Carter exhaled slowly. Because they don't believe I should be involving myself with anyone outside their approved circle, anyone they can't control, anyone who doesn't fit their checklist. Imani stared down at her trembling fingers. I don't understand. I haven't even done anything yet. That's what scares them, Carter replied. You don't owe them anything. You came from a community they've ignored for years, and you're not tied to their politics. You're unpredictable, and that makes you powerful. Imani had never thought of herself as powerful. Invisible maybe, but not powerful. Look, Carter continued gently, you don't have to take my offer. This isn't pressure. This is opportunity. If you say no, I'll still make sure the university hears about what happened. Imani shook her head. That's not the point. I want to help my neighborhood. I've always wanted to. A small smile touched his lips. Then let's start. The next morning, a black sedan picked her up again, this time taking her straight to the Whitmore Civic Foundation, a far quieter building than the corporation's headquarters. The lobby smelled like polished wood and new beginnings. Carter's assistant, Elaine, greeted her with a warm nod. Miss Imani, welcome. Imani followed her to a glass conference room filled with maps of South Briar, notes pinned across bulletin boards, and stacks of reports the city had apparently ignored for years. This, Elaine said, motioning broadly, is the mess you'll be helping us fix. Imani walked around the room slowly. Graffiti-covered buildings, vacant lots, reports of code violations, leaky roofs, outdated zoning laws. She touched one photo gently. The community center on Baxter Street. She'd played basketball there as a kid. Last year, it was almost shut down. This place deserves better, she whispered. That, Elaine said, is why Carter picked you. For the next hour, Imani took notes, asked questions, and offered ideas, real ones, based on the people she grew up with, the homes she walked past 1,000 times, the mothers who worked 2 jobs, the kids who had nowhere safe to go after school. Elaine's eyebrows lifted as she listened. You've thought about this, she said softly. I've lived it, Imani replied. But as the meeting ended and Imani stepped out onto the sidewalk, her phone buzzed. A text, no name. You don't know what you're getting into. Leave it alone. Her stomach turned. Another message followed instantly. South Briar doesn't need heroes. It needs silence. Imani looked up and scanned the street. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want change. Someone who feared the voice she hadn't even used yet. She closed her phone and straightened her shoulders. If they wanted silence, they chose the wrong woman. Imani didn't sleep that night. The anonymous text kept replaying in her mind, but fear wasn't the emotion rising in her chest anymore. It was resolve. By morning, she was standing in front of the old South Briar Community Center, the same one she'd once dreamed of fixing as a teenager. Carter met her there, hands in his coat pockets, expression stern. They threatened you too? He asked quietly. Imani nodded. They don't want change. Carter exhaled. Then we give them something they can't bury. Together, they stepped inside. Neighbors had already gathered. Mothers, elders, teenagers, old coaches, even folks who never came to meetings. Word had gotten around. Imani Williams was leading something new, something real. She stood before them, heart pounding, but voice steady. I know they want to scare us, she began. I know they want us quiet, but this neighborhood matters. You matter. And nobody gets to tell us our voice is too loud. A murmur of agreement grew into applause. A man in a navy suit slipped in through the back. Langston, Carter's OO, the same person who filed a report on her. He stood rigidly, watching. Imani didn't stop. We're going to rebuild this place, she said. Brick by brick. Not because the city cares. Not because the corporation cares. But because we do. Langston stepped forward, ready to shut all down. But Carter moved between them and said loudly, if anyone here wants to stop this woman, they'll go through me. Gasps rippled across the room. Langston froze. Carter continued, eyes locked on him. And I promise you this, the days of intimidating South Briar end today. Whispers turned into claps. Claps turned into cheering. Langston swallowed hard, realizing the power dynamic had shifted. He stepped back and left the room without a word. Imani felt her chest rise with a breath she'd been holding for years. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it. When the room finally quieted, Carter turned to her with a soft smile. This is just the beginning, Imani. She nodded, tears warm in her eyes. For once, she whispered, I think the world is finally listening. And for the first time in a long time, Southbriar felt like it had a future.